So this is a nice long report from the World Health Organization and United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I wanted to include a few podcasts from here. Again, just a brief summary of this nice long report because it's especially focused on water supply and sanitation in extreme weather events. The poster child for such an event was I think 2010 floods over Queensland, which destroyed their wastewater treatment plant, and it caused many $billions in losses, but I think it took many years to rebuild it. So many such water supply and sanitation systems are highly vulnerable to extreme weather events, and extreme weather events are increasing in duration, frequency, and intensity. So we have to worry about this, especially other than just water and nexus of water with food, energy, and health, and so on. Okay, so I want to read a few points here. Again, fairly brief, nice report, you should read it. Without any doubt, water supply and sanitation together with energy have contributed to a major change of living conditions in human history, which means our dependence is high on these things, which means our vulnerability is high as well under climate change. There is also wide agreement on the importance of water supply and sanitation systems to environmental issues and health problems, social services, poverty alleviation, sustainable water resource management, food production and security, drinking water supply, and water-related natural disasters. This is a cross-sectoral nexus approach we are talking about again. When the weather is abnormal or the climate is under pressure, water and wastewater service systems stand to lose much of their environment and health benefits for two main reasons. They lose their ability to deliver the services required because of direct infrastructure damage from floods, windstorms, and tide surges, or from lack of water itself when cold spell turns water to ice, for example. They become a significant source of chemical and biological contamination of ecosystems, water bodies, and soil by means of their discharge and polluted overloads. This contamination may sometimes be irreversible and may also affect areas beyond local and national borders. This transboundary aspect is particularly important in the European region, in which there are over 150 transboundary rivers, whose combined watersheds cover more than 40% of the land surface area of the region. So when you have a continent with so many small countries connected by rivers, transboundary issues are very critical. Then when adverse weather events recur, or when water cycle variations show patterns that do not match usual meteorological and hydrological sequences, there is a serious threat to sustainable livelihood and to the health of exposed populations. So agricultural production, industrial, domestic use, etc. are very high across Europe, so these are very critical issues. Such events have also Africa and Asia and so on, so not just Europe. Such events have already occurred in the European region in the past 20 years. The average number of annual disastrous weather and climate-related events in Europe increased by about 65% between 1998 and 2007. That gives you the date of the report. But overall losses caused by such events increased during the 1980 to 2007 period from a previous decadal average of less than 7.2 billion euros over 1980 to 1989 and about 13.7 billion euros over 1998 to 2007, so near doubling there. In terms of social impacts, the CRED Emergency Events Database, Center for Research on the Epidemiology of Disasters, CRED, shows that in the past 20 years, about 40 million people required health assistance and had basic survival needs such as safe shelter, medical assistance, safe water supply, and sanitation. This represented an increase of about 400% compared to the 8 million people affected in the previous 2 decades of 1970 to 1990. So water overall is important for health, but water quality and sanitation are particularly critical. According to a 2006 World Bank report, all countries of Central Asia and the Caucasus are highly exposed to meteorological and hydrological drought. A severe and widespread drought in 2000-2001 wiped out between 10% and 26% of crop and livestock production in Armenia, Georgia, and Tajikistan, which is 3 to 6% of overall GDP That's pretty disastrous. So obviously the report is more than a decade old, but the points are still very valid. So I will go through some of these. I won't read all of these. In the same period, the hardest hit communities of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan required food, drinking water, and agricultural relief supplies costing about 190 million US dollars. Windstorm lost data across 29 European countries also show an increase of more than 200% in the past 20 years compared with the 1970 to 1989 period. Okay, so let's jump a little bit further, and there are several questions. What are the various steps to be taken? So I don't know if I want to read all of these. This is mostly about the background on climate impacts, extreme events, known cases, and risk management strategies, and so on. So I did put in all the text in here, but what I'll do is jump to key findings in each chapter, so you can read the report and catch up on the text that I skipped. So let's jump to, so that's the introduction chapter. Let's jump to chapter 2 on basic disaster preparedness and early warning. Key findings, key messages. Disaster preparedness and early warning are essential to limit the effects of extreme weather events. Key issues for the development of adequate preparedness are summarized below, again re-emphasizing some of the points. The effectiveness of risk reduction in extreme conditions relies upon a commitment to apply integrated risk management principles in development planning, the existence of well-defined institutional responsibilities, a democratic process of consultation and stakeholder engagement, and an information and awareness campaign. It moves beyond disaster response and reaction towards risk anticipation and mitigation. Okay, so this is still not about resilience building for the future, but just how to deal with proactive systems building for reducing the impacts of extreme events. Preparedness plays an essential role in the whole process, focusing on technology and trained staff needs in terms of procedures and tools necessary for coping effectively with a disaster. All information collected by monitoring network should be made available to all responsible organizations, including public health systems, the managers of reservoirs and dams, and water utilities operators who could be affected by the impacts at both national and transboundary levels. This doesn't occur, as is obvious in many disasters, whether it's Libya or Europe or India, where dams are either opened without warning, or extreme events are not informed to dam operators, and so on and so forth. Information development should provide adequate support to prevent vulnerability assessment and post-event assessment of environmental and socio-economic damage. Many monitoring, forecasting, and management tools are already available for disaster preparedness planning. Okay. So pre-vulnerability assessment, I'll just randomly read few points here and there from the report that's more than 100 pages long. So you are assessing hazard. The tools needed include hydrometeorological data and policies, so dam operation, reservoir, flood control, etc. Data is obvious, stream flow, flood data, peaks in rivers, rainfall frequency data, evaporation data, temperature data, soil moisture data, and so on. For exposure, you will need topographical data like specialized geological, geomorphological, soil studies, floodable areas, satellite images, and so on. And you need socioeconomic or census data such as geographical distribution of population, geographical distribution of specific categories of population such as old people, sick people, weak immune compromised people, surveys, density of housing, siting of factories and infrastructure, economic data, and so on. So Vulnerability itself, as vulnerability is a combination of factors that can be physical, economic, social, political, environmental, technical, ideological, cultural, educational, ecological, and institutional. These factors are often complex, dynamic, interrelated, mutually reinforcing or amplifying of each other. There are examples here. What does this mean? Typically, vulnerabilities are computed based on all these indices, and they are very useful because how to reduce vulnerability then becomes easier if you have a good sense of what are the big levers that determine vulnerability for any particular hazard and exposure. Okay, data needs for integrated assessment. You need water quality, so precipitation, evapotranspiration, soil moisture, snowpack, turbidity, pathogens, chemicals, etc., and meteorological variables like temperature, wind speed and direction, seasonal water forecasts, and so on. Okay, um, let's leave this here and come back and look at health system planning for flood preparedness. These are obviously overlapping with some of the things we have looked at, or maybe I should finish this and then jump to chapter 4. So health system planning for flood preparedness, you need pre-flood activities, health protection during the floods, and long-term health protection as well. So health outcome and preventive measures for each type of activity. Long-term risk management, interinstitutional coordination, infrastructure flood proofing, capacity building and personnel training for emergencies, and so on, in terms of being prepared for with pre-flood activities. During the flood, you need prevention and treatment of infectious diseases, respiratory problems, injuries, mental health problems, skin and eye diseases, which need review and prioritization. Intensify monitoring of drinking water quality in the tap, for example, water and food provision, outbreak investigation where appropriate. So you need the system all set up to get into action when the flood happens, which is obviously a high intensity event. Long-term health protection requires treatment of mold and other pathogenic exposures, post-flood counseling for anxiety and depression, medical assistance, enhanced cause-related surveillance, research for future preparedness and response. Okay, so let's come back and look at vulnerability of coastal areas and bathing waters in extreme weather events. As I said before, this this report is more specifically focused on extreme events and water sanitation issues, so we will do this as a separate series of podcasts. Okay.